Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the life and work of Verena Kast, who is a true giant in the world of analytical psychology. And we're not just going to look at her biography. We're going to treat her journey as a kind of masterclass, a masterclass in how you build a life that has a real lasting impact, both intellectually and in the world. Okay, so let's start with this really foundational idea from C.G. Jung. He says the basis of our personality is affectivity. Now, that's just a way of talking about the world of our emotions, our feelings, our moods. What Jung is saying here, and this is so crucial, is that our emotional core isn't just one piece of who we are, it's the engine. It's what drives our thoughts and our actions. They're just the symptoms. And that idea that our feelings come before our thoughts, that's the key to everything we're going to talk about today. Because this is really the story of Verena Kast. She was a psychologist who took that single idea from Jung and basically made it her life's work. So we're going to trace how she nurtured this principle, first inside herself, in her own inner world, and then how she used it to go out and reshape the very institutions of her field. So our first lesson, we have to start at the beginning, right? In her childhood, we're going to look at how a really powerful and resilient inner world gets built, and how that becomes the raw material for a life that really matters. What's so fascinating here is the contrast. Katz was born into this pretty small, physical world of peasant farming in Switzerland, youngest of 4 kids, often left to her own devices. But instead of that world feeling small, she made it huge by escaping into books. And her grandfather really encouraged this. He would tell her fairy tales, but mix them all up, teaching her that stories, and really your own mind, were these fluid, creative places you could play in. And this quote, it just nails it, right? For her, having an inner world wasn't just some childhood fantasy. It became the absolute foundation for what Jungians call individuation, that process of becoming who you truly are, a distinct, solid self. And that principle would become the bedrock of her entire professional life. Okay, so on to lesson 2. Let's see how this all starts to connect. We're going to look at how that powerful inner strength gave her the courage to constantly push back against what was expected of her, and to, blaze her own trail. I mean, when you look at her career, it's just this series of brave moves against the current. At only 15, she goes against her family, becoming a teacher not as a final goal, but as a clever way to get to university. Then she jumps into the famously chaotic, very male-dominated Jung Institute, while also getting a formal university degree. And she was always pushing, getting her diploma even when people told her she was too young. It was almost like a rehearsal for later, when she'd become the IAAP's first female president. Every single step shows she refused to let other people's timelines define her. And what's so brilliant here is how she handled all this pressure. She didn't just pick one world. Nope, she lived in 2 at the same time and used them to balance each other out. The university was all structure, rules, statistics. But the Jung Institute, that was her space for creative chaos, a place where dreams were treated like real data. And she said it herself, she would recover from the university at the institute and then recover from the institute at the university. I mean, think about that. That's some serious mental and emotional flexibility right there. But still, even with all her talent, all her progress, she kept hitting this wall, this subtle, kind of dismissive resistance. She is good, but she is so young. And this wasn't just a one-off comment. It was this constant refrain, this atmospheric pressure that was always there, trying to slow her down, trying to make her wait her turn. It was the sound of the old guard getting nervous about someone so brilliant, moving so fast. Which leads us right into our third big lesson. Okay, so you have this inner strength, this independent mind. Now what? How do you actually use that to lead, to get through conflict, and to shake up these old, stubborn institutions? So at 50, Kast becomes president of the International Association for Analytical Psychology. And you have to understand, this was a classic old boys club. Some guys on the board had been there for over 20 years. She was walking right into the heart of a system that was deeply set in its ways. Her biggest test, her defining challenge, was trying to modernize the IAAP's old-fashioned constitution. And this quote just tells you everything. You can feel the pressure she was under. This wasn't just some abstract policy debate for her. The whole future of the organization was on the line. And the real risk wasn't simply losing the vote. No, the danger was death by 1,000 cuts. It was getting bogged down in endless arguments and procedural tricks from the old guard who would just try to run out the clock. If she failed, the status quo would be locked in for years. And this is where you see her leadership shine. In that super tense moment, a colleague made a really bold suggestion. Let's not vote on every little piece. Let's vote on the entire reform package all at once. Kast took the motion. It was a gamble, a really smart, strategic move that just cut through all the potential nonsense. And it worked. The package passed, and the IAP was suddenly on a new, more democratic path. But later on, a crisis hit much closer to home. The original Jung Institute in Zurich had this really painful split. There was this powerful, unelected board that just refused to change, and the analysts felt like they had no voice. It got so bad that a big group just left to start their own institute, and Kast had to make a choice. And she stayed. She felt the Mother Institute was an emotional core, a home that was worth saving. So she didn't abandon it. She stayed to help rebuild it, to save its legacy, while bringing in new creative ideas. And that brings us to our final lesson from the mind of Verena Kast. And honestly, this might be the most profound one of all. Her philosophy for how to live a productive, forward-looking life.
This quote, this is just a powerhouse of a philosophy, isn't it? This isn't about ignoring your past or pretending bad things didn't happen. It's a deeply practical, psychological insight. It's about being smart with your energy. You only have so much of it, right? So why would you waste it on something you absolutely cannot change?
And you can see this forward-looking energy in her writing. She wrote so many books, but it wasn't about building a reputation. For her, writing was a tool for really understanding things herself. It would start with needing to teach something. Then it would become this quiet, meditative process. And she always aimed to be clear, to write for everybody, not just other academics. And her big takeaway? It's a huge lesson for any of us, right? You don't really get something until you have to explain it or write it down.
So, what did this philosophy actually look like in her daily life? Well, it wasn't some kind of bucket list of things to achieve. It was more about a state of being. Taking the time to just watch the deer in her garden, going back to old books and seeing them with new eyes. But most importantly, it was about joining with others to imagine how we could live better, more caring lives together. And just being open, not overplanning, just being ready for what life brings your way.
And so, in the end, she leaves us with this huge question, a challenge, really. She saw that we live in a culture defined by loss and constant change. And so she asks us, not just as individuals, but as a collective, what new visions, what new shared stories and imaginations can we create to build a better, more caring way forward?